Hi, my name is Mikey Dedmon. I am 39 years old. I reside in Paris, California, but Pittsburgh in my heart.
What is the reason that you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan?
Troy Polamalu. That is the reason I became a Pittsburgh Steeler fan. Of course, Troy Polamalu played for USC. And so in 2003, when he was drafted, first round, 16th pick, to Pittsburgh, I knew right then and there that's where I was going. That was going to be my team. And it did not disappoint. I am in love with the Pittsburgh Steelers from the way the organization operates. And then the fact that there's so much loyalty in that organization. They've only had 3 head coaches. Like, tell me another organization that is that invested into their people. So, yeah, Troy Polamalu is the reason I'm a Pittsburgh Steeler.
What did you love about Alamana?
I just loved everything about him outside of the field, the type of man that he is, very humble, very God loving, very soft spoken. He has a great demeanor. He's a family oriented person, which resonates with me because of my family and the upbringing that I have. But when he gets out on that field, Trey is a beast, okay? He is doing everything that he possibly can to give his team the advantage. It's just beautiful to watch. It's exciting to watch.
When you think back on your fandom, what are a couple of the most thrilling memories that you have of being a Steelers fan?
Yeah, so of course, when they won Super Bowl 43, that was so exciting. And the biggest part of why that's the big moment for me is because a few years ago, I went to watch the Steelers play at the Arizona Cardinals, and right where Santonio Holmes caught that game-winning touchdown, I met Santonio Holmes right there in that moment and got to take a photo with him. I wasn't physically there to see him do that touchdown, but to come back years later and watch him and see him and meet him at that very same spot was, oh, man, it's like a fan's dream come true. Seriously, it was amazing.
Any other memories you remember because they were a great moment or because of what you were doing when it happened?
Yes, a very memorable moment for me is watching Ben Roethlisberger take his final lap around the stadium the year he retired. It was very emotional for me because he has been the quarterback most of the time I've been a fan. I love Ben. He's my GOAT. I knew once Ben retired, it was going to be a change in era. And it truly was. I would give anything to go back and be in that moment because I know at the stadium it was probably very powerful because at home I was crying and just sitting there, tears rolling down my eyes because I knew how powerful this moment was, and we will never get another Big Ben.
At what point in your life did you start having health challenges?
So, just thinking back to when I was younger, even in elementary school, I always had pain in my legs and my knees and in certain points of certain joints in my body. And I remember they used to tell me, "You need to play sports. You need to," because I'm tall. They want me to play basketball. I'm not a basketball star. I can't bounce a ball. But it was also painful, and they thought I was a lazy kid. I didn't want to do anything, but it was painful. Then in the ninth grade, I developed something on my knee to where it was very hard for me to move and things like that. They've done surgery on it. And then I was off at college and was just having issues, transferred to a university in 2008. And that's when I started to notice hair loss. I was having hair loss and extreme fatigue to the point where I was drinking rock stars, monsters, like those were my daily beverages. It sounds funny, but at one point in my life, I was addicted to 800 milligram Motrin because it was taking the pain away. And I was taking them multiple times. I would wake up in the middle of the night and pop 2 or 3 800 milligram Motrins because of the pain that I was in. And it wasn't until then that I started to associate some of the pain with the weather. And then coming out of college, my hair started thinning more, and I started to get really bad face rashes. Going through treatment, like tests and things like that, a few of the things that they said is, oh, maybe it's cancer, maybe it's fibromyalgia, maybe it's thyroid disease. And it wasn't until I went to see my primary care physician in 2015 that they decided to do a lupus panel on me because I had a positive ANA, and I started to have more of these markers for lupus. And they did a lupus panel on me, and we finally had answers. But in the meantime, I was also going through kidney failure, and we just didn't understand. And so once the lupus panel came back, they're like, okay, this is lupus.
What do you remember about the day when you finally got that diagnosis?
January 29th, 2015. It's my dad's birthday. And I knew we had taken the lupus panel. I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go to this appointment, get ready for them to tell me nothing. Like they've been telling me they don't know or I don't know. And I went to see the rheumatologist, who's still my rheumatologist. He's amazing. And he said, my dear, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you have systemic lupus.
And what did you feel in that moment?
Honestly, I didn't feel anything because I didn't know what lupus was. I had no idea what lupus was. I had heard a couple of people say they had lupus. I knew that Toni Braxton, the singer, had lupus, but I didn't know what that entailed. I had no idea what it entailed. So I left the doctor's office and I called my mom and I said, hey, Mom, they say I have lupus. And she said, oh, okay, we're going to take care of it. And I said, okay. Little did we know, it's not that simple. Yeah.
What is lupus medically, and then what does it really mean to have lupus?
Yeah. So medically, lupus is an autoimmune deficiency or disease. It's called like the great imitator because it takes on almost any and everything. It could look like the flu. It could look like pneumonia. It could look like cancer. It could look like all these different things. And essentially it's your immune system fighting itself. So instead of a normal immune system fights off diseases and illnesses and bacteria and viruses, well, my immune system doesn't identify anything as being good or bad. Everything is negative. Everything is bad. And so it literally attacks everything from your hair follicles to your muscles, your joints, your blood, your heart, your brain. In the reality, lupus doesn't have a one size fit all. It affects every single person differently. My particular lupus really likes my heart, my kidneys, and my skin and my hair at one point. So there's times where I'll have extreme breakouts. I can get oral sores in my mouth, makes it really hard to eat, drink. It causes inflammation in my joints. It causes hair loss. I have patches of hair missing in my head that will never grow back. It attacks my kidneys. So I've been in renal failure 3 times. And also the lining of my heart. And then I have something called Raynaud's. So at times you'll touch me and they're like ice. Tips of my nose, the tips of my ears, and also like the tips of my toes. It's hard. It's really, really hard. I can't be in direct sunlight. The sunlight triggers lupus flares. It'll cause rashes and boils in your face and in your scalp. So there's not a day that goes by that I don't wear sunscreen. I've tinted all of my windows 5% to help alleviate some of that direct sunlight. So I've had to alter my life a lot.
What was the last Steelers game that you went to in person?
The last Steeler game I went to in person was the Arizona Cardinal game, which was 2 years ago. And that was a great game. We won. But it was also amazing to see. I spent 3 days in the city prior to the game. I got to tour the stadium. But the whole time I was there, it was like we were in Pittsburgh because there were Steeler fans everywhere. All you seen was black and gold. And that is so important to me, being a fan, how well we travel. That was a Pittsburgh Steeler game. The game, terrible towels were everywhere. It was such an amazing day. And, I enjoyed it. And it was special to me because going to a game where there were so many Steeler fans and they were winning, and it kind of brings me back to when I went to my first home game and I didn't have the experience that I had hoped to have due to health reasons. But that was a good game. That was a good game.
When was the game that you went to at home?
It was a Thursday night game. We were playing the Tennessee Titans, and it was a very, very cold day. I believe the temperatures were around 32, and it said it felt something like 21 or something of that sort. I got to the stadium early because I was really excited. I try to come prepared as much as I possibly can. I had heat warmers in my socks and in my gloves, and I was double layered up, jerseys, hoodies, beanies. But it wasn't a match against the cold weather. I made it 3/4 into the game and had to leave because I was in so much pain. I was so brokenhearted. Literally brokenhearted that this is my first time going into a home game. This has been my dream as a Steeler fan to make it to a home game. And having to leave at third quarter broke my heart.
What do you have on? What did you have to sort of battle the elements that night?
Yeah, so the night that I went to the home game in Pittsburgh, I was wearing 2 layers of socks. One was a heated sock with a heated stone inside of the bottom of the sock, Ugg boots, and I had ordered this 2-piece heat undergarment. And so I had that on, and I had sweats on top of that. I had my hooded Steelers sweatshirt on, gloves, heat insulated gloves with heat stones inside, and I had 2 beanies on. One with the little ear things and my Steelers scarf. Yeah.
Can you sort of take me back a little bit to what that experience must have been like for you?
My limbs were feeling like literally needles were stabbing me in each of my joints. I started to have swelling in my knees and around my ankles. And the pain in my shoulder, back, and elbows were just excruciating. I was sitting next to a couple and they were like, "You'll be okay, you'll be okay." And even the wife was like rubbing my arms and rubbing my back. And she's like, "Come on, you got it, you got it." I was just sitting there because I knew if I stayed any longer than I did, I would end up in the hospital in Pittsburgh. So I remember when halftime came, I got up and I walked up into the concession area to see if I could just kind of warm my body up a little bit, see if I can kind of readjust my body and do what I can to be able to make it through the game. Once the third quarter started, I came back down and I sat down in my seat, and I remember texting my mom and my dad, and I said, "Guys, I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it through the game. I'm in too much pain." My mom texts back and she said, "Baby," she said, "you came, you saw, you conquered." She said, "You did it." She said, "So now you have to take care of yourself." And so I just sat there and tears were rolling down my eyes, and the lady next to me, and she said, "You're here. You made it to where you want to be. But it's time for you. I think you should go." And so I just sat there one extra second and I said, okay. So I grabbed my stuff and I'm crying as I'm walking up the stairs. And then as I get to the tunnel, the top, I look back and Ben throws a pass to Antonio Brown in the corner and he catches it. And then I stood there and I just looked and I was like, gosh, I don't want to stay. I just want to stay. And from that point on, the Steelers lit the board up. They ran the score up that game. And I remember I had called an Uber to pick me up and take me to the local Permane Brothers. And I walked into the bar and I still had my sign that I had at the game. And I walked in and the guys said, it's like the whole bar turned around and looked at me. And this guy goes, hey, she brought a sign to the bar. That's cool. And I walked over and I explained to them what had happened. And they were like, you're a Yinzer. You're with us. We got you for the rest of the day. And I sat with them and continued watching the fourth quarter of the game. And I was so proud of the Steelers. Like, they really went bananas that game. But it was a hard experience to have.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. Can you describe what that emotion was like to process?
Yeah. It was a little bit of animosity because I'm looking at people jump up and cheer and, it was definitely sadness. There was frustration and there was pain. And the pain was real. It was me coming to terms with, this is life with an invisible disease. This is life with lupus. You sometimes miss out on big opportunities, like attending your first Steelers home game and not being able to stay through because you're in pain. I don't blame anybody. This is my reality. This is my life.
Can you describe what it feels like to be sore or to be tired?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Imagine having 100-pound weights tied to each of your limbs and maybe 1,000 pounds strapped to your back and you're trying to function. It is literally the most exhausting feeling ever. And sometimes I have to remind people, your fatigue is not like my fatigue. There's times I can look at a piece of paper or a sock or something on the floor, and in my mind, I'm trying to tell myself, do we have the energy to bend down and pick this up? Could this be left for another day? And those are the decisions that I have to make sometimes, with resting my body and not doing too much, because it only gets worse progressively. It doesn't get better.
Is there ever a time right when you wake up where you're not in some pain?
No. I am in pain 24/7, every minute of the day. Every minute of the day. I operate on a 7.5 pain scale.
How do you sort of deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so some of the ways I deal with it is just, I have to be self-motivated. I have to, a lot of times I pray through it and just say, please just get me through this day, get me through this meeting, get me through this Zoom call, A lot of times I operate without even acknowledging it because it's such a regular thing. It's when it gets to those 8s and 9s is where I have to really motivate myself to get through those things. And the biggest challenge is trying to make myself okay with stopping and just letting it be. because I've always been a very resilient person. I've always been a person that was able to do what's needed and do extra. So allowing myself grace is something that I often struggle with myself, to say, hey, you know you have lupus, you know what the symptoms are, you know what the challenges are, you need to just relax. And so those are the challenging times for me when I can't. I don't like to say no, but I've learned through this disease, there are times you just have to say no.
Is there a cure for lupus?
No. There's no cure for lupus. They're actually starting to get a lot better with some of the treatment options. One being Benlysta, which is the medication that I'm on, that I go into the oncology suite and get infused. That is the first FDA approved medication to specifically treat lupus. All other medications out there are to treat symptoms of lupus. This is the first lupus drug that is specifically for patients with lupus.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
So can you sort of take me through what it's like when you went to the game at Heinz Field?
Mm-hmm.
What was that process like for you? I'm guessing it's pretty different than sort of the average fan.
Yeah, so the preparation comes even before the day comes, which is why when I chose to go to that game at Heinz Field, the seat selection was really important to me. I needed a front row seat, or a seat where there was enough space to stretch my legs out, because I knew there was going to be cold weather. I didn't expect it to be that cold, but all that I could prepare, I did. And that's ordering specialized undergarments that were supposed to be heat controlled, looking at the actual layout of the stadium to see how many steps it's going to take me to get to where I need to go. Where do I need to park to be the closest that I can, so I'm not overexerting myself by walking too far or walking up too many stairs. And then also the determining factor of whether I go to a game at a stadium or not is if it's an indoor stadium now. If it's a night game, yeah, I could do an outside stadium because there's no sun. I wish I can afford to get box seats because that would definitely be an option, but I have to look at the seat placement. I have to look at, what the weather is going to be like. How is the stadium designed?
What are some situations that you've experienced where you're trying to figure out how to do something in the best way, but the people around you or the people who work at the stadium don't necessarily understand what you're going through?
I've had situations to where, just more recently visiting one of the stadiums, I was trying to tell one of the staff at the stadium that I needed to use the elevator because the amount of stairs that I needed to climb, I was going to not get to the seat and never move again. And the person looked at me and said, "This is for disabled people." And I said, "Well, I have a disability." He said, "You don't look like you're disabled." And that is very, very disheartening to hear someone say that, because the amount of people who walk around on a daily basis with these invisible diseases and the hell that they're going through in their body, and just to have someone who has no idea say, you try to explain to them this is what you have, and they say, "Well, you don't look like it." Well, if I looked like how I feel, I would look a mess. So that was very heartbreaking. I immediately turned to anger, and I was like, well, what does a disabled person look like? Explain to me what a disabled person looks like. And they're like, "Sorry, ma'am, we can't. This is for certain people with disabilities." I've had several situations like that at another stadium as well. I went up and I asked for handicap seating for the extra room, and they said, "No, those are only for disabled people." And I'm like, how do I have to prove to you that I'm disabled? Do you need an X-ray machine to see that there's swelling in my body? Like, I don't understand. So, not having staff well-versed or educated on what type of disabled people can come through, it doesn't do the fans any justice. Those fans who have literally probably worked so hard to get to this point, to be able to come and enjoy a game despite all of the challenges they know they're going to deal with. And just to have any accommodations that could be made for them not be made is very heartbreaking.
What can teams do to be more accessible to fans that have invisible disabilities like lupus?
I'm thinking maybe there could be some type of pre-registration that these fans can do, to where they can maybe go onto the website knowing that they're coming to the arena or the stadium to be a part of a game, but maybe do some type of pre-registration acknowledging what their modifications may need to be and things of that sort. I think that could be a start, so that, it at least saves a worker who's maybe not intentionally meaning to be disrespectful or rude by saying you don't look like you have a disability. It kind of gives them a pass to where they don't have to now make the determination if a person's disabled. Maybe I have a registration card to say here's my registration card saying that I need accommodations, and those be made. In a perfect world, I would love to see temperature controlled arenas, to where even if it is 30 degrees outside, somehow, some way, it could feel like 60 or 70, where people are more comfortable. Creating a little more room, like leg room in the seatings, but also making sure that there's enough handicap and disabled seating available. Because I've had that happen as well. When I went to see a basketball game, they were willing to accommodate me, but it was all occupied. It was all taken up. So unfortunately, I didn't get an opportunity to utilize the accommodations that were available. So when I go to research the stadium before I go, those are some things that I look for, like where the handicap seating. But I find it really difficult to be able to find those things and how to purchase those seatings and things like that. Even with trying to call to get the right person is like a needle in a haystack. So a lot of times I just bank on getting there and going to the customer service and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. There's a few stadiums that have made it very easy for me. Like, oh, okay, let me see your tickets, and they'll swap out my tickets. And then there are others that don't.
What was an example of a situation where they did it right?
Yeah, so I went to see a basketball game, and I try to purchase them either on the edge to where I can put one leg out or put two or whatever. But the farthest I can get out was like maybe 3 seats from the edge. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna just give it a shot when I go. And so I went up there and I said, hey, I'm living with a disability, and the seats are really hard for me to get in and out of and sit in. And they said, oh, that's fine. We have some disabled seating here, and it has extra room. You're a little further up. Do you mind that? And I said, absolutely not. I would prefer comfort over how close I am. And it was a super breezy thing. They swapped out my tickets and had someone walk me over to that seating, and I enjoyed every moment of being there.
Why is it important for you to be able to stretch your legs like that?
Yeah, because it helps me to stay for the whole game if I have the room to be able to stretch out my legs. If not, they swell. Like even sitting in a position with my knees folded this way, there's pain that is going through the joints here and through my kneecaps. And so once I'm able to kind of relax those and unfold my legs, and kind of gives me opportunity to kind of massage those things and bring some rub and put some heat to it. But when you're in those seatings and it's just, you're kind of cramped up like that for the whole time, there's no room to stretch out your legs. And then also sitting in those seats, people have to come in and out and go to the restroom. You constantly have to stand up, sit down, stand up. And the bending on my knees, oh, so painful. Even sitting at a level that I'm sitting now, getting up is very painful. And it's a lot of popping and noises, weird noises that go on. So yeah, it causes a lot of swelling for the knees to be compressed like this, and just a lot of tenderness.
Are there things that probably other fans take for granted, but that are difficult for you to do?
Absolutely. Jumping up and down. Yeah. That's one that if I could have jumped up and down when I seen Antonio Brown make that catch as I was leaving, that would have been what I would have done, you know? Or just being able to come out and be amongst other fans, because that's important. And so I never want people to think that I'm asking for seat accommodations to make myself feel comfortable, because ideally, I would love to be in a sea of other Steeler fans and being able to hug and jump up and down and clap and wave and really support our team as a unit. Like, that is important to me. And so I think that is a treasure that people have that they don't too much know. Like, just being around other fans and feeling the energy and being able to see the people in front of you and around you. And sometimes the seating that does accommodate me to be able to stay longer, it's kind of spaced out. I don't get to really be in the heat of the moment.
The schedule comes out. What is the perfect game for you?
Yeah, the perfect game for me to go to, like where all the elements just line up, would be in Pittsburgh. It would be on a cool temperature, 70, 73 degree evening where the sun has gone down and my team is out there killing it. Like, that would be the perfect game.
Yeah, so my name is Ryan Ykoruk. I'm a huge Phillies fan, a huge Eagles fan, and this is my brother. What's your name?
Jack Ykoruk.
We're the Ykoruk family, and we live just outside Philadelphia.
We're huge Philadelphia sports fans, predominantly the Eagles and the Phillies.
How long have you been married?
22?
22 years.
Yeah.
What was your sports fandom? Was it the same?
Oh, yeah, we root for the same teams for sure, but Victor was and is a bigger fan than I am, even though I have to say, with 2 boys and a husband, you know, this is our life, is sports. So
For sure.
What are your favorite sports to play?
My favorite sport that I play is soccer, track and swimming. Those are the 3 sports, but I think my favorite one is soccer. How about you?
What's your favorite sport, Jack?
Baseball.
So, Bridget, how would you describe the presence that Philly sports is in your day-to-day life of your household?
it's on every day, every day. If the Eagles are on, of course, we're watching that. If the Phillies are on, we're almost always watching the game, or it's in the background.
Are your mom and dad big sports fans too?
Oh, my dad is a huge sports fan. My mom is too, but my dad basically, he loves sports, loves the Eagles, loves the Phillies. I'm not a big hockey fan. Like, I do like the Flyers, but I'm not a big fan of hockey than I am between football and baseball. How about you?
I love baseball.
Yeah.
Baseball, the Phillies, Bryce Harper.
Yep.
What's the story of your family expanding?
I remember when I found out I was having twins, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, how am I going to handle this? And for some reason, because I'm one of 6 girls, I just assumed they were going to be girls or at least one. And then I found out I was having 2 boys. And then I was like, no, really, how am I going to handle this? So anyway, it's been fun though. It's funny growing up with all sisters, and now I live with all men, and you know, so one of the things that comes out of that is that, you know, our world revolves around sports.
How would you describe the boys?
They're both very sweet.
Yeah.
They're both good kids. I can't complain. We're very blessed in that regard.
Yeah, they're very well behaved. They are rule followers. They try to always do the right thing all the time. We have it a heck of a lot better than many families with kids on the spectrum. So we're very, very lucky.
At what point did you find out that one or both of them were on the spectrum?
I knew when Jack was a baby, an infant even. Within the first 6 months, I knew he was different somehow. He just didn't follow the normal timeline of milestones that children typically follow. So I knew he was delayed, but I thought he was just delayed. I didn't know until, I don't know, years later. He didn't get diagnosed until he was think 4 or 5 when
Yeah.
he was diagnosed with autism. But I already knew at that point, I just needed the medical diagnosis, but I already knew he was on the spectrum.
I had to do a lot with coordination. He wasn't able to take the natural baby steps and progress in a natural way. He wasn't crawling right away. He wasn't walking right away. So there was a lot of coordination that was kind of throwing up a red flag with Jack.
But really, it was the talking. That was,
Yes,
he was
for
only
sure.
he was only delayed with walking and coordination type stuff. With autism, communication is the biggest battle, hurdle. I don't know how to say it. It's, communication is a deficit that is, in our case at least, the most noticeable.
And what about for Ryan?
For Ryan, honestly, I didn't know he was on the spectrum. One of the teachers actually recommended that we have him tested, and he was diagnosed at, I think it was 5 also. Yeah, so I was a little surprised that he was on the spectrum because compared to Jack, he was a lot more typical.
Yeah.
And so there are certain things about him that are very typical, and then there are certain little things about him that are kind of obviously on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
How would you describe what having autism is like? How does it affect your day-to-day life?
Well, to me, I have a little bit of autism. Well, to affect my daily life, it's kind of stressful sometimes at some moments, especially when I have like a test or that's coming in the future. But all I could say is that having autism is kind of good, but kind of bad at the same time because I'm not kind of advanced. I mean, I'm doing really good in school. I have straight A's this year, and I got into the National Junior Honor Society, so that's amazing for me.
How would you say your autism is different than Jack's?
To say it in a nice way, I feel like my autism is a little better than him because I like to explain things better than he does. I'm kind of good at English, but not the best in general. I'm not that good like talking to others, but math I'm really good at. Like I love math. I have a tutor for English to help me get better when I get into high school next year.
I think you're doing great talking to me.
Thanks.
You have twin boys, now they're 4 or 5 years old, and you're told that they both are on the spectrum. What was that like for you?
It's an interesting question because I don't know if I didn't have a reaction. I was kind of a little more cold because I didn't know how it was going to be. I didn't have a reaction because I didn't have a level of expectation. I did not know how it was going to go, what we needed to do. There wasn't a sense of nervousness, but there also wasn't a sense of confidence as what our steps were. I felt like we had to go through a research process, which is her department.
Yeah, for me, it's funny. I remember because I knew Jack was different and I felt like I needed help. I remember I couldn't wait for the diagnosis because it actually takes a long time to get evaluated. I was anxious to get the diagnosis so that I could get some help to help him and me. Then finally he was diagnosed, and then my emotions totally changed. I went from being focused on getting the diagnosis to now like, oh, now what am I going to do?
Next steps.
Yeah, what does this mean? What does this mean for our future, for his future? I remember being very, very nervous about what the diagnosis meant and how it was going to change our lives and how our lives would be atypical and what did that look like, what was that going to mean. And one of the things that I think a lot of parents of autistic children worry about is what's going to happen when you're gone. So as crazy as that sounds, like even though they're little, when you find this out, like you immediately go there and you start worrying about the future. And honestly, I still do, of course, because we don't know what his future holds.
Our whole lives are based on a build-up right now. We're in build-up mode to someday one, if not both of us, won't be around, and how are they going to be able to take care of themselves, knowing full well that they're up against it in many ways.
They have each other, which is a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah, you're right. I think about that all the time too. Thank God Ryan has Jack, and thank God Jack has Ryan, because in so many ways they help each other out, just getting through life and being each other's best friend.
Ryan was asked in school recently, who do you want to live with in the future? And it was about either getting married or having a roommate or go to college or whatever, and his initial answer was Jack. He wants to live with Jack. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit about what you learned about autism as your kids were diagnosed?
Well, we're still learning.
Yeah, the range is vast. It's huge.
Right.
Our boys are mildly on the spectrum compared to others. Don't have a lot of the behavioral issues that might be, synonymous with kids on the spectrum. But even Ryan, who you would never know is on the spectrum, has his difficulties, and that's really what you learn, is by spending all the time with them, you learn that it doesn't have to be an outward behavior like flailing or shaking things or stomping your feet or anything like that. It doesn't have to be so obvious for them to be on the spectrum, and that's really, really what you learn, is just how large the category is.
How would you describe some of the ways that Jack and Ryan demonstrate or indicate that they're on the spectrum?
Jack will flail just a little bit, especially when he's excited, kind of is jumping up and down like a little bird.
Yeah. I
It's
joke with him too. I say, "Are you flying?" Because he'll just jump and flap like a bird.
And then also, currently Jack doesn't speak as clearly as we all would like, so that's a very obvious way. Whereas Ryan is, verbalizes very, very well, but we tend to call him our Captain Obvious because he goes on and on and on and beats things down to a pulp with explaining things.
Going to a stadium to see a game in person, that would probably take some planning and some energy from you guys.
We are, particularly my wife, are planners, and she is extremely organized. So going to a game is like packing for a camping trip. There's checklists. We make sure we have one of everything, whether it be wipes or tissues or water bottles. We pack for a whole weekend just to go down the street to go see a game. And we're actually, every now and then, our family will make fun of us because we come with so much gear, not needing a lot of it. However, we never want to be without something in a pinch. So going to a game, to me, is all about being organized.
Well, like you said, though, it's planning. Planning is key. I'm sure I'm not that different than a lot of moms, but when you've got autistic kids who can't communicate, I just want to make sure I have everything ready to go to make sure this goes well. I think that's the key, is planning to make sure it goes well, because right. That's kind of the goal, is like expose him to things, see how he does. If he really doesn't like it, of course we're not going to torture him and make him do it again. But at the same time, we try to do things that parents with typical kids do. We want him to be able to enjoy all the same kinds of things that typical kids enjoy. And so I'm always trying to make sure that he has a positive experience so that he'll want to do it again.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It's gone. Home run.
My favorite experience of watching Philly sports is at one of the Phillies games. I believe was it 2 years ago when they played the Pirates, and I got a ball from one of the Phillies players. And how about you? Do you have a good experience?
A few experience.
Do you have a good experience of watching the Phillies or the Eagles?
Yeah, I know.
Philly, do you have a good experience?
You're Philly fans.
One way I try to think of this is like, yeah, Jack's 14, but it's almost like he's 3 in the way that parents would plan how they're going to do something. So the way you would plan to take a 3-year-old somewhere is how we plan to take our 14-year-old somewhere. And what you might be worried that, might upset them or scare them, that's kind of where we're at 14. For us, I'm still kind of planning for the 3-year-old trip.
What were some of the things that you were nervous about them experiencing or moments in the game, and how did your expectations match up to what the reality was?
Well, Philadelphia sports fans and the fandom of Philadelphia is notorious. Everybody knows that we're very, very passionate. Particularly football games can be rowdy. So my initial fear was that they didn't get caught up into that type of chaos, the violent chaos, but it worked out pretty well. We prepped Ryan particularly that this is the style you're going to. He's used to baseball games. They're much more sedate than going to an Eagles football game. So he knew the intensity and energy level was going to be through the roof, and he was definitely prepared.
Again, though, planning is key. We only went because it was a day game.
Right. And a 1 o'clock game.
And that worked out.
Yeah.
What was it like to go to the Eagles game in person? I mean, that stadium is pretty big.
Yeah, stadium is huge. We were on the 3rd level, but it has the cheapest seats, so it wasn't very exciting, but it was good. We won in overtime, and Jake Elliott, our kicker, made the game-winning field goal, and we won.
The cheap seats.
Come on, man.
Well,
There is no cheap seats in that place.
I was just going to say, that was a pretty good seat, it looked like to me.
Yeah.
We were about, what, 5 seats from the top?
Doesn't matter.
You're in the building. You're in the building.
There's only, what, 7, 8 home games
Yeah.
a season?
No, I know.
So, like, you're lucky to go to one.
No, of course.
So in my mind, you guys did just fine, I think. How would you describe what it was like to experience that game as a fan and also as a parent?
Well, it was amazing because we won in overtime on a field goal. So as a natural sports fan, everybody can appreciate being at home, winning in overtime. I mean, it's just so fantastic. It's an electric atmosphere. But I think the other thing that I really stuck with me is that because we were sitting kind of high up in the stadium, they were shooting fireworks up every time there was like a really good play, and especially at the end of the game, there was fireworks all over the place, and we were pretty close to them. And I just remember kind of glancing down the row at Jack just to see his reaction, because I didn't know if he was going to be panicking because it's loud and sounds like bombs are going off, or if he's going to be relaxed. But he loved it. I kind of reminds me of like the 4th of July. He's glued to fireworks. Like, he absolutely loves them. And the display they have. So to me, that's what I remember most about the game. Ryan has a large understanding of the game. So he followed it from beginning to end. So, you know, when people are screaming in joy because the field goal went through when we won, I mean, I look at him, I know that he's feeling the same way that the crowd is feeling. He's that excited. When I look over at Jack, you're not exactly sure if he understands completely why everybody is manic for that particular second and screaming at the top of their lungs. So me personally, I want to see him enjoy the experience because it was a fun one. It was intended to be fun, but sometimes he might not either understand it or he might not take it that way just because it is so loud.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like I'm his interpreter. So I have to explain to him what's going on. I have to explain to him why people are being loud, because I want him to understand it, you know, that it's supposed to be fun and that it's nothing to be afraid of.
Right. I mean, the Eagles Stadium does have a fantastic sensory room, and I think there was moments where we probably could have put him in there, but going back to our parenting style, we tend to push the envelope with Jack to see.
Well,
his
that's where
styles.
I did not plan on going to the sensory room, and I should have planned on that.
I feel like we're clocked in all the time. In
Yeah.
every single social setting, there is never one eye not on one of them. We're always on the clock. Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't know. It's almost natural. I guess it is natural.
What are some of the things at a stadium that could be a problem or could be an obstacle for an autistic person?
To me, it's the crowd.
Yeah.
And particularly when you usher in and usher out, maybe like at halftime or in between innings at a baseball game and people are running to the concession stands, it's just a mob scene. And most everybody is worried only about themselves, so they're just focused on getting from point A to point B, and they're almost like kind of running. Whereas, you know, our boys might be kind of, you know, looking around or, you know, trying to take in the scenes. To me, that chaotic part of a game is something I worry about every now and then. But the older they get, the more aware they are of how they need to be and the things that they need to focus on.
One of the traits of autism is there's a social disconnect. And yet, like what I worry about, especially in a scenario where there's crowds and things, is when people are rowdy or they're getting out of control. Jack is very aware of that.
Yeah.
He's very aware of other people's vibes, and he picks up on, you know, when people are not maybe acting the way that they should. He's very sensitive to that, I would say. I think it makes him very nervous when other people are out of control. So that's what I worry about, is how he's going to react, you know, to other people.
I mean, is there a history of Philly sports fans being out of control? Is that a thing?
Not at all.
Ryan, did the noise or the lights bother you at all? Or did it bother Jack at all, do you think?
It probably bothered him. The noise a little bit, but the lights, no, because it was a day game. So if it was a night game, it would be a little worse for the lights. But for him, probably was the noise. Because he, just like other autistic kids, he don't like loud noises, right?
Yeah, I don't make any loud noises.
Yep. But for me, I don't think I have any worries about the noise of the lights.
You mentioned before the sensory room. Obviously, the Eagles have one, not every team does. What are some things that you feel like stadiums and teams could do to be more inclusive of fans that are on the spectrum?
You know what? It would be nice if they had like a box seat or an area where you're kind of.
They can view it, but they're protected.
Yeah. Like it would be a special area that might not be so rowdy or so loud. I feel like that would work. That would be like something teams could do to make it a little bit more up their alley.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think to advertise the things that are provided to these types of individuals is important. I don't think certain families know that they can have a guide to take them to their seat, or they can have essentially, you know, protection around them if they're in an uncomfortable situation. I don't think it's advertised enough. They might have services there, but it's not overly obvious that they're offering things to these types of individuals. And I think that, you know, education and communication is key.
Yeah, one thing I thought of when we were there is, like, where is the sensory room? I knew it was there, but I didn't know where it was. So even if I was going to pull Jack out, I would have to go ask somebody, like, where it is. And I'm thinking, I mean, obviously I could do that. There's you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, of course you have, you know, a map or something, an app on your phone that'll lead you there. But when you are up against it with 75 other thousand people there and people going around.
Yeah, it
you know,
would
the
be nice
concession
if it
stands.
was like you said, more advertised as you're walking in. That,
Right.
you know, by the way, it's like a reminder, like, yeah, we have a sensory room if you need it. And another thing I thought of was I should have probably had a set of headphones with me, and I didn't find out until later that they offer them at the stadium.
Yeah.
So now, if we go again, I will go get a pair and make sure I have them with me so that Jack can put them on and not have to deal with the loud noises as much. I think that would have helped if I had thought of that the first time.
Agreed.
When you guys went to the sensory room, how would you describe it?
The sensory room is very kid-oriented and very fidget-oriented. There's a lot of activities, whether it be playing with blocks or Legos or things that they can manipulate with their hands. You know, they call it the sensory room, things that you can touch to put these, you know, individuals more at ease. It's just full of, you know, very interactive activities that are calming and soothing to them.
And it gives them a break. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, just to have a space you can go where you can get away from the crowd and have some downtime. I think sometimes that's all that's needed. And so to have a place like that to go is nice.
Yeah, I mean, games can be very stressful in many different ways, but when you have all that stress pent up, and you can't express yourself or you don't have the ability to calm down in the moment, that's what the sensory room offers you, is the ability to decompress and recompose yourself. And being constantly nervous or constantly tense that whole time probably puts many of these individuals over the edge. So they definitely need to somehow, some way come back down to earth and kind of reel it in, and it gives them a real quiet opportunity to do so.
What do you like about going to a stadium?
The same about the Eagles, like Jalen Hurts.
Is that your favorite player?
Yes,
Who does he play?
the Eagles.
No, what position does he play?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure, Ryan.
So funny. He plays quarterback.
It seems like they really help each other. How would you describe the way they do that in the context of being sports fans?
Ryan is clearly the big brother in this situation. Ryan is, like I said, very well versed sporting-wise. He understands baseball, football inside and out. So he takes pride in explaining the game to Jack. So the biggest interaction we see, which is on a daily basis, is Ryan's explaining what offsides might be, or what overtime means, or whether the ball's fair or foul and why that is. He loves to explain everything. He was explaining to Jack the other night about the NFL draft that was coming up and why we should take a certain player. So we see a big brother in him, mainly.
Yeah, and I think he wants Jack to be as excited
Right.
as he is.
He wants Jack to share that emotion,
Yeah.
and Jack doesn't always kind of buy into it. He might not always be as interested as Ryan is.
Yeah, but I think it's nice that Ryan tries.
Yes.
How would you describe the things that they love about Philly sports?
Well, Ryan loves a winner, and kind of for the most part, our Philly sports teams have been doing pretty well. For me, I don't know, Jack, I'm sure you're going to have an opinion about Jack, but for me, it's definitely the musical aspect of everything. People singing, or the organ or piano playing, or things of that nature. You could just tell he kind of really relates to that. He's got a good ear. He definitely has a keen sense of tone. So I can tell he's enjoying something when people are being festive about it in a musical sense.
Jack, do you know what song the fans sing after the Eagles score a touchdown?
Fly, Eagles, fly, on the road to victory. That's right.
Yep, Fly Eagles Fly.
That's pretty good. You're a pretty good singer.
Yeah, I'm a pretty good singer.
What was it like when they were singing after they scored a touchdown?
That he loves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He likes to sing, so that was fun.
Yeah, he knows that that's,
What you do.
yeah.
Fly, Eagles, fly, on the road to victory. Fly, Eagles, fly, score a touchdown, 1, 2, 3. Hit 'em low, hit 'em high, and watch our Eagles fly. Fly, Eagles, fly, on the road to victory. E-A-G-L-E-S, Eagles.
When we were talking before about how to do this interview, you were very certain that you wanted us to represent your words in closed captioning instead of a voiceover. Would you mind explaining why that's your preference and why that's an important way for you to be represented in this project?
And what was your connection to sports when you were a kid? What are the things about being at a big stadium, a big game, whether football, baseball, basketball, hockey, whatever it is, what are the things that you like about being in that atmosphere? That's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about your hearing? When you made that distinction between identifying as deaf and hard of hearing, what led you to make that distinction?
No, I can't.
What are some of the tools that a deaf person uses in those situations where you're only dealing with a hearing person? When you go to a stadium, what are the main challenges that you encounter as a deaf person?
The challenge that I'm facing. Sometimes any matter I am please
You talked before about some of the interactions you've had with stadium workers at a concession stand or helping you with a ticket. What are the typical reactions that you get? What are some of the solutions that you wish were in place that maybe just aren't there?
I know.
When you're at a game and it's a big moment, what are you able to experience in those moments that makes you feel a part of that community?
I'm Rick Morin. I'm a Red Sox fan. I'm legally blind. More often than legally blind nowadays, we say low vision. My acuity, which is, how much I can see at what distance. The doctor, last time he measured it, he said it was 3 fingers at 2 inches. It had been 2,500, which means what a normal person would see at 500 feet, I have to be 20 feet. I've got a pretty good visual field, but everything is blurred. My left eye is just about totally gone. I've got some peripheral vision in my left eye. And my right eye is where I do most of my usable vision. As an example, when I'm looking out at this whole room, I really can't make out anything. I can guess that certain things are what they are because of the context of what we're doing. But in terms of getting around, I do very well with mobility. I use a white cane when I'm in an unfamiliar place. I've got no depth perception, and I'm just absolutely terrified of stairs. And in fact, I have fallen off a stair and broken my ankle pretty badly. Ended up in the hospital for 6 days, which surprised me.
What is the medical condition that affects your vision?
Yeah, the medical condition is called severe optic atrophy. So with optic atrophy, the eye itself is good. I don't have any problem with glaucoma or pressure or anything like that. It's the optic nerve in the back of the eye that never fully generated. The electrical connection between the eye and the brain, that is where the problem is.
Has your vision been the same your entire life? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse?
Yeah. No, my vision, well, I've had this all my life. So I was declared legally blind in 1962, I believe. For the longest time, probably through high school, I was able to read at, bringing things in close. I could never read blackboards and whiteboards, and it just absolutely terrified me to go to school. It wasn't until I applied for a scholarship in college, that I realized that there was something called low vision clinics that I could go to, and they equipped me with a monocular that I started using in school. And I graduated Northeastern with a 3.9 cum. I used to drive the professors crazy. I would sit in the back of the room and just use that monocular, and they didn't know what the hell was going on because I didn't necessarily tell them that I was legally blind. I started to work, and I use magnification in the work that I do on a computer. We rely very, very heavily on technology to do stuff. When I first started doing the magnification, I was magnify about 8 times. It stayed that way for the better part of 34 years. And then all of a sudden it tailed off. It got much, much worse. And as over time, I had to keep increasing the magnification, and I finally got to the point where we actually did some time studies. It was taking me 80 hours to do 40 hours worth of work, and that's when I said it's time to go on disability and retire.
What is low vision?
Yeah. I mean, low vision, it's like autism, right? I mean, the spectrum is huge, right? No two people with low vision has it manifest the same way. I've yet to meet someone who's got similar characteristics of their low vision than I do.
How would you describe how visible your disability is to the general public most of the time?
Yeah. If you meet me or look at me, no one would think that I have any kind of visual impairment just to look at me, right? I'm not wearing, dark glasses. I often don't carry a cane. I sometimes carry a cane for no other reason than to identify myself as someone with low vision, because you constantly walk into situations where, you're asking somebody for some assistance to explain or describe something like a menu on a board at a sports stadium, and the reaction looking at me without identifying myself as legally blind is, what's the matter? Where are your glasses? Can't you see? And I've had people point and I said, I can't read it. It can be very uncomfortable. So I started using a white cane as a means to identify myself as visually impaired.
How did you become a Red Sox fan in the first place?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Springfield, which is Western Mass. There are people in Western Mass that are more in New York than they are Boston, let's say. And my dad was a Yankees fan. And I grew up in the 60s, and, there was the impossible dream team or whatever. I mean, the Red Sox were doing quite well in the 60s, but it would always let us down in the playoffs. I never really, when I was younger, watched the games on TV. I just grew up listening to them on the radio and would get to know or feel like the people that are announcing the play-by-play were, some of our friends and perhaps part of our family, if you will. Becoming a Red Sox fan was a reaction to my dad being a Yankees fan. He was such an obnoxious Yankees fan that I had to be a Red Sox fan just to counteract him, right?
If somebody said to you, Rick, tell me what you love about being at a Red Sox game at Fenway Park, how would you answer that question?
Oh, I love everything, right? And I think the same kind of stuff that everybody loves. My daughter had her first hot dog at Fenway Park and fell in love with Fenway Franks. The whole ballpark experience, it's all associated with a whole bunch of memories. As a person with low vision, as much as you can watch things on TV, as much as they've got things mic'd up and stuff, there's nothing like hearing the crack of the bat there at the park, especially if you're pretty close to the field. One of the things that I was always emphasizing with the Red Sox was proximity was important to us so that we could hear some of the actual sounds of the game. So I love that. The sights, the sounds, the being there with other people, the community, the fan base, being able to yell and scream at our favorite players, yell at the umps, what's the matter, you blind or what? That kind of stuff. It's just the overall experience.
You don't feel one way or the other about yelling that particular thing at an umpire?
No, in fact, another funny story. My buddy and I did this baseball tour in 2008, and we had reached out to all the ballparks ahead of time. So all the ballparks had arranged tours for us. And I think it was in Philadelphia. It was just one of the standard tours, and the tour guide was oblivious to the fact that we were visually impaired. I mean, my buddy is totally blind, and it just went over his head. But all their signage was for the players in the locker rooms and stuff. They had Braille on all their signage because they did their signage according to ADA specs. So part of the tour was to go over and let everybody see that the umpire's room has Braille on it, right? So the joke was they really are blind, right? That kind of stuff, that doesn't bother me.
Somebody says to you, tell me the best thing you've seen at Fenway Live, what would you say?
Well, the game that has the biggest impact on me was that third game of the 2004 ALCS where we got beaten 19-8. I went home and it was over. I mean, it was just over because the Yankees were just handing us our lunch through the whole first three games. Went home, packed up everything, and my daughter came up to me and said, "Daddy, you got to believe." And God, I wish I had a video of her telling me that. So obviously the Red Sox then went on, won the next four. There's so many memories of things that happened in that series. It was such a special series.
When you look at the players on the field, are you looking for hairstyles or height?
Well, I don't ever get a really clear view, even with the monocular, of anybody. But, I know the positions that they're playing, right? So I know who the first baseman is and all that kind of stuff. So I can associate it in my mind, who these people are. You could recognize Big Papi a mile away. One of the things that I always tell people about my low vision is that if there's some real pronounced physical characteristic that you have, I may be able to, to guess that, that's you or recognize you. So, it'd be pretty much the same, for the ball players. Pedro was pretty easy to recognize, and Schilling, his build was, Schilling, he was a big guy. That was Game 6 of the 2004 ALCS. And, Schill had injured his foot or injured his ankle, and they had done some kind of a surgical procedure on it to allow him to play, and nobody knew until game time if he was actually going to pitch. So when the game started, out came Schilling, and the place went crazy. The TV folks picked up pretty early in the game that his sock had blood on it, and it got increasingly more bloody as time went on. And he was pitching a lights-out game. He had to be in a lot of pain, and they were talking about it on the radio and so on. So he's on the mound, so he's, pretty stationary, pretty easy for me to, pick up my binocular and just focus in on him. And I think at those games, I had a binocular where I could actually zoom in, and I zoomed in to see the sock.
I think the first thing that I heard from so many baseball fans who have low vision was about the importance of being able to have the radio in your ear. How would you describe how important that element is? And then what is the biggest challenge that fans with low vision often face when it comes to that audio?
The audio is important to us because that's how we know what's going on, right? Some of the challenges, I think most of the ballparks now have gotten much better with this. A lot of times, you're either listening to your own radio, and if you're listening with your own radio, you're guaranteed that the broadcast will be delayed, right? You've got like a 10-second delay. You'll be hearing in the radio what's going on described 10 seconds after it actually happens. That can be both good and bad. We worked with the Red Sox to get them to put a direct feed right into the transmitter of the devices that they were giving us to listen to the game. So we were hearing it in real time. And what's funny about that is if there's a game that gets everybody really excited and the crowd starts screaming, it drowns out whatever you're listening to on the radio. The delays drive me nuts, but when there's a delay, you can listen to when the crowd has calmed down what's going on, but you don't feel like you're part of the experience if the thing is got a delay. In addition to audio, for me to be able to see the game well, I need unobstructed sight lines. And about the only places in the ballparks where you can have unobstructed sight lines are in the wheelchair seats. They're elevated so that folks in wheelchairs can have an unobstructed sight line. And I find that, the crowd noise is a little bit more bearable when you're sitting in those seats. When the crowd gets crazy, when everybody stands up, it's like I just put my hands on my ears and push the earbuds as deeply as I can so I can hear what's going on. Joe Castiglione is the voice of the Red Sox, been the voice of the Red Sox for tons of years. He's painting the pictures for us, and he's got just such a grandfatherly, approach to things. He feels like family. Joe is just, calm. And in the summertime, when I'm at a friend's house, we'll go out on a typical night at my friend's house is to go out on the patio, grill some hamburgers, and listen to Joe Castig.
What's your routine on a day where you're going to a ball game?
Game day routine, I'll grab a jersey or a t-shirt, baseball t-shirt, whatever. I've got a whole bunch. Right now I'm wearing an Ellsbury shirt. I've got a Schilling shirt, that I would typically wear. But the big thing is, how do I get there? And nowadays, Uber. And, Uber can be a challenge because, when you're going to the game, it's fairly easy, but, you never know where you're going to get dropped off. There aren't always clearly defined pick-up and drop-off areas, so the guy could choose any gate. What would classically happen is he'll go wherever there's the least amount of traffic, close to a gate to drop me off, which may or may not be the gate that I need to use to get in. The biggest problem is, when you leave, it's finding the Uber, because everybody's calling Ubers, right? And, it's hard enough for me to identify the car. The best I can do with Uber is hope that it's like a white or a black car, because the contrast is pretty good, and I'll look for white or black cars. But if there's a sea of cars, it's hard for me to find the car, and the Uber drivers often get impatient. I've had Uber drivers that have canceled my trip because I can't find them.
Once you're at the stadium, what would you do?
I like to get to places early, really, really early, so that I don't have to be dealing with crowds. The tickets that I had, when I had the season tickets, obviously I always had the same seats, so I could navigate to my seats fairly easily. Got to be really good friends with one of the ushers. I got invited by the Red Sox one year to speak at a training session about people with vision disabilities, and this guy recognized me as somebody that he'd seen at the park before and came up and introduced himself to me after I presented. And then every time I went to the ballpark, the minute he saw me, he would, anything I needed, he'd be there to help me with. Getting there early, I'll roam around outside the park and see what's going on there. Outside Fenway, they have a whole bunch of concessions there. But I like to get to my seat early so that I'm not dealing with a lot of crowds. But being there early is still fun to me, because it's still at the ballpark. You're there for batting practice usually. And I try to see as much of the batting practice as I can with my monocular. Obviously, there's no radio description at that point. But
what are some of the challenges related to steps and just sort of moving to your seat that can come up at a stadium?
Yeah, it's kind of steps, and handrails. If there are handrails, you can navigate the steps safer, because you can be a little bit more cautious. And the thing that I find the most difficult, and I think a lot of people do, is you'll have steps that are irregular, either depth or width. And, if it's a normal staircase, I can go up and down those fairly well. The last step, because of my depth perception, is usually an issue. And, that one needs to be marked. But the thing that I have the biggest problem with when you go up in Fenway and the grandstands, the width of the steps starts to get bigger as you get further up. And if you don't have depth perception, that's a case where I have to use my cane to make sure that I'm navigating that properly.
What are the differences that you have experienced around how stadiums identify those situations?
The stadiums that I've been to recently, they're getting pretty good about putting a very high contrast stripe at the end of stairs at the beginning and at the bottom. And, that helps a lot.
What does that feel like to be on a set of steps in the Fenway Grandstand and maybe be a little bit unsure about where the bottom is? Can you describe how you feel in that moment?
Yeah. If you watch me go downstairs, when I get to the bottom step, and the top step too, because, it's inconsistent sometimes how they stripe the top step. I will just stand there, and hopefully there's a handrail. It's easier for me for a handrail, but I'll just inch out very slowly and get everybody around me all aggravated because I'm so tentative with what I'm doing until I feel, the actual step. When I'm getting down to the bottom step, I'm so paranoid now about it that I just will take, several minutes to just, with my foot, even with my cane, I'll still use my foot to make sure that I'm not going to walk off the end of something. When I get on solid ground, I'm still a little tentative, and I'll sweep my feet around to make sure that I really am off the steps at that point.
What experiences have you had in terms of other people not necessarily knowing what's going on with you in that moment?
Yeah, I've had people run into the back of me with their beer, and then want to, give me a good, punch because I've ruined their beer. People will just get impatient; they won't understand. Occasionally, I've had people walk up to me and ask me, "Do you need any help?" And what's interesting is, as I get older, people are more apt to ask me if I need help. When I was younger, and I think this is true for a lot of blind people or low vision people, when we were young, we were apt to not accept the help because we were too proud and wanted to be very independent. Nowadays, if someone offers me help, I'm probably gonna thank the person and acknowledge it and take it. If you're in between innings and someone wants to run up the stairs to go to the concession to get a beer and you're between him and the beer, you can imagine the type of reactions that you get sometimes.
What are the challenges with getting food and getting something to drink from the concession stands?
First off, I got to find the stand, right? So I got to know where it is. So I'll gravitate to wherever I know, that the concession stand exists. And I'll usually, I'll order something that I know that they have. I may ask somebody to read the menu to me, but, I'm so tired of the way people react when you ask that I don't bother. So what a lot of us do, forget ballparks, just generally when we go to establishments, they're going to have a menu. What we really do well with is when we can go online and find ahead of time what the menu is. Now at a ballpark, if I know a certain concession has got like kettle corn was only available for the longest time in the center field bleachers. So now I'm sitting behind home plate and I've got to get myself over to that spot. And it wasn't the easiest thing to navigate. There's people that are just going in every direction. I'm trying to use a cane to navigate my way through that. It becomes very difficult and, frustrating to the point where I say to myself, is it really worth it?
When you have asked people to read the menu to you, what is the typical reaction? How would you describe what typically happens?
I'll hold up my cane and I'll say, I can't see very well. Can you read the menu to me? And a lot of times what people will say is, what do you feel like? Okay. And it's, no, I want you to tell me what you got, not what I feel like. Or they'll just brush it off. The most often reaction is people are quite rude. I mean, occasionally someone will be very accommodating and will take the time, but more often than not, you get a negative reaction, especially, someone like myself where, there have been times where I've wanted to wear dark glasses and just, appear more blind as a way to try to break through that barrier, but I don't do that.
If you are asking the person at the register to read the menu to you, what's the reaction generally from the people in line behind you?
Just impatience. I mean, the lines, you probably have already waited 20 minutes in line, right? If I take more time than someone else at the register, the people behind me are going to get, upset. And, come on, buddy, let's go. Come on.
How would you describe what you feel like in that moment?
Well, it used to really, really bother me. Nowadays and this is what I've convinced myself over time is the case, is that when people react the way they do, they're often dealing with a blind person or a low vision person for the first time in their life, and don't even realize, what they're doing. If I'm in a patient mood myself, I'll turn to the folks and just try to explain to them what's going on. A good amount of time, people will be understanding when I do that, sometimes embarrassed.
Would you try to avoid situations by being strategic about when you went and did different things?
Oh yeah. I would often get up when the opposing team was at bat because most people were in their seats or coming back to their seats. So the traffic would be pretty light, at that period of time. There's another problem with concessions too. They're using kiosks, computer screens to order food. And some of these concessions don't allow you to order give your order to a person. Those kiosks are totally inaccessible to us because they're flat screen. The image is always changing. I can't magnify it. People that are totally blind don't have any speech output to tell them what's on the screen. Part of what I have to do is seek out concessions where, there aren't kiosks. And I've been pretty good at finding these concessions that seem to be tucked away in corners that are usually not the busiest compared to others.
Sure.
So,
You mentioned, I think, at one point that you were hit by a foul ball. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell the story? Like, what happened?
Yeah, well, it's cool because with the season ticket, there were times that I had a pair, and there were times where I would go to the game by myself, and the box office would allow me to redeem those two tickets for a ticket up in the premium seating area. So, and I liked the premium seating area because I could sit, right on a rail and, be up high and have no obstructions at all in front of me. I mean, my sight lines up there were beautiful. And ball was hit, and, I could sense that it was coming in my direction, but with my lack of depth perception, what I see coming at me is kind of like moving like this, jerkily. And before I had time to react, the thing had hit me on my arm. It hit hard, and the bruise had the stitch marks in the bruise. I mean, you could literally see that it was a baseball that had hit me. I mean, had that hit me in the head, that could have been catastrophic.
What could stadiums do to make it safer for fans with low vision?
Yeah, well, I think, the safer thing isn't unique to people with low vision, right? I mean, we've heard about all these people getting hit with flying baseball bats and foul balls. And I think the parks are getting better at putting screens in more areas. So what the stadiums should do to accommodate people with low vision is make those seats available. The way the ADA works is you're supposed to have a certain number of tickets that you make available to people with disabilities, and it normally gets translated into people with wheelchairs. And those tickets are usually in the areas that are protected. And so my argument is that I have a right to those seats like everybody else.